I think it's because Hannah More and William Wilberforce were themselves very interested in her. Hannah More wrote a book especially for her, in effect a book on how to be a good queen. And she was looking to Charlotte as somebody who would be a virtuous female sovereign at a time when the monarchy was not setting a very good example. And so she was absolutely devastated when Charlotte died, cried for a week, made all the servants wear black. Um, and I think it was only towards the very end of her life that Hannah More saw a gleam of hope with the possibility of Queen Victoria coming to the throne. But for a while, I think people like evangelical reformers have pinned such hopes on Charlotte because after a very turbulent adolescence, she'd settled down and she was living quietly and engaged in philanthropy, and she seemed just the type of monarch that they wanted. Well, that's a very interesting question because I think it really depends on how influential Leopold would have been. Before she met Leopold, she had very strong political views. She was a firm Whig, opposed to her father's, the Prince Regent's Tory ministers. And in fact, she gave him quite a lot of political trouble because of her strong Whig views. So if she had continued in that way, then she would have been queen at the time of the Great Reform Act of 1832. Which, as a strong Whig, she would have supported and done her best to make it easy for the government to get the measure through. And that's extending the electorate and getting rid of some rotten boroughs type of thing. I think the unknown factor is Leopold, because she was very much influenced by Leopold. And we don't know how much influence he would have had on her and whether he would have encouraged her in her Whig principles or whether he would have drawn her in a rather more conservative direction. So it's difficult to give an absolutely precise answer to the question, but looking at Charlotte from what we know of her before her marriage, she would have been, I think, a constitutional monarch and done her best to support the government in its reforms. Yes, well, in a sense, you've got another unknown factor, and that is how long she would have lived. Queen Victoria was robustly healthy and lived to a great age. Charlotte was not. And so I'm answering the question on the assumption that she would have lived until middle age, but it is actually quite an assumption from what we know. And I think that she would in many ways have been similar to Queen Victoria. She was happily married, for example. Let's assume things turned out well for her and she'd survived childbirth and had children. She and Leopold, I think, would have been very like Victoria and Albert and, presented this image of a happy family life. So in that sense, I think the landscape would have been rather similar. The monarchy was changing anyway, it was becoming less politically powerful. And it was even more important that the monarchy set a moral example. And Charlotte and Leopold were very concerned to do that. So I think that they would have been, in a sense, like Victoria and Albert. Oh, enormously. When she got there in the summer of 1816, she stood on the steps of the house, looked round and said, "Here at last." For the first time in her life, she had somewhere that was really her home. A beautiful place, lovely landscape garden that she could do things with the man that she loved, away from her father, away from her grandmother and aunts, whom she felt were always criticising her, and entirely in her own territory with the man that she loved. I mean, what's not to like? It was blissful for her.